Today I googled, what are the most dangerous places on Earth to visit? Part 3. Today's destination is the forbidden North Sentinel Island. Unlike most small remote islands, this one is inhabited by a tribe quite literally untouched by the outside world for hundreds of years. With an estimated 50 to 200 members, they are extremely hostile to any visitors from the outside world, with a number of recorded events where sailors, fishermen, and even missionaries have been attacked and killed just for turning up. And the craziest part is because of the isolation of the island for hundreds of years, as the world has evolved around them with cars, medicine, technology, they remain untouched. And no one can even communicate with them, as nearly nothing is known about their language, and due to their extremely violent nature towards any outside visitors, this island is one of the most dangerous places on Earth.
Water doesn't float in air, but weren't you always told that clouds are made of water, and those are clearly floating, so who's doing the lying? I wouldn't blame you if you guessed that clouds are actually made of water vapor instead of liquid water, but that's not true because you can't see water vapor, so you wouldn't be able to see the clouds. Is it ice then? Well, yes, there can be ice crystals in clouds sometimes, but last I checked, ice doesn't float either, meaning that doesn't solve the question. So if they're either made of liquid water or ice, who gave clouds the free pass to break physics by floating in air? Surprisingly, unlike the 2017 Astros, the clouds are playing under the established rules, and by that I mean the laws of physics. Clouds are actually constantly falling, just really slowly. To see why, let's quickly graph the terminal velocity of raindrops as a function of radius, and if you don't care about learning, skip ahead to 125, but just know that I'll be heartbroken. Using Newton's second law, we have the force of gravity pulling down and the force of drag opposing it. I'm neglecting the buoyant force because air is much less dense than water. The acceleration is 0 because we're looking for terminal velocity. Then, after substituting in the appropriate equations, I had a few things worth noting. First, the density in the force of gravity term is for water. The volume is for the assumed shape of the drop, which for simplicity will be a sphere. Next, the density in the drag equation is for air, and the area is the cross-sectional area of the drop. I substituted the volume and area formulas because they are both dependent on the radius, which is the variable of interest. I'll speed things up now since the rest is just algebra to get the terminal velocity alone on one side of the equation. We are left with the constant value and the radius. I plugged in values at standard conditions even though this is in the sky because this is an approximation anyway and it's just easier. Lastly, I wanted to plot the radius in millimeters, so I just made one quick unit conversion. This is the final equation, and after plotting it, you can clearly see the terminal velocity increases with droplet radius, which makes sense because the volume grows more rapidly than the area. Just as a sanity check for our model, I quickly googled how fast the average raindrop falls and found that for a 1.5 millimeter raindrop, it'll fall around 7 meters per second. On our graph, a 1.5 millimeter radius leads to 9 meters per second, which is pretty close considering real raindrops aren't exactly spheres. So that's for a raindrop, but cloud droplets are actually on average 20 microns in diameter, so 0.01 millimeters in radius. I needed to zoom in to get a more accurate reading from our graph. At 0.01 millimeters, that shows a terminal velocity of around 0.75 meters per second, which honestly still seems pretty fast. However, if those drops are falling from around 12,000 meters in the air, I can solve for the time it would take to reach the ground, and it came out to around 4.5 hours. The analysis we just did also explains why aerosol droplets and dust particles fall so slowly to the ground. Since the water in clouds are always falling, it sure seems like it should be raining anytime there's clouds, and that it would just take a while to reach the ground. However, we've been assuming the air is still this whole time. In reality, weak updrafts can offset the small fall velocities. Even large amounts of liquid water will float or rise with a strong updraft like at the Hoover Dam. So to summarize, clouds typically form in pockets of rising warm air, and as more water condenses in the cooler, higher altitudes, the droplet size increases until they're large enough to fall quickly to the ground. That's how clouds weighing up to millions of pounds appear to defy the laws of physics. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you next time.
If Earth wasn't spinning, would its gravitational pull be different? At first I was going to say no, because the mass of the Earth wouldn't change, but actually, yeah, it would be different. Now, the strength of gravity is dependent on two things: mass and size. Or more specifically, the distance from the center of that mass. Now, rotating objects tend to bulge at the center, get a little bit thick around the middle. With Earth's current rotation, the radius at the equator is around 6,378 kilometers, whereas to the poles it's only 6,356 kilometers. Now, ignoring geological features like mountains and valleys because they do play a large role on local gravity, the average strength of gravity at the equator is 9.798 meters per second squared, whereas at the poles it's 9.863. So slightly, a 1% difference, but still a difference no less. But if the Earth didn't rotate, then that wouldn't be the case.
A lot of iPhone people always say, hey, I'll never switch to Samsung because iPhone has stuff like AirDrop. Samsung has that too. Just watch. So first I'm going to try out the Apple. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to hit AirDrop and then MacBook Pro. It's connecting. And I should get it right about now. So now let's do it on Samsung. I want to send this photo over to the Samsung Galaxy tab. So I click this, I click Quick Share, click the Galaxy tab, and it sends it over basically immediately. And there we go.
On today's episode of researchers that are trying to convince people that the findings of their very popular research study are now wrong, we have Gabe Mirkin. In 1978, Gabe Mirkin published this book where he popularized the term RICE, rest, ice, compression, elevation. And for decades, everyone from doctors to parents, that was the recommendation. If you sprained your ankle, if you got hurt, you RICE it. That is until 2013 when this book, Iced, the illusionary treatment, was published. This book used very credible sources to show that ice, compression, and elevation actually delayed the healing process. The research was so solid that 2 years later in 2015, Gabe Mirkin went on his own website to say that RICE was wrong. Now the accepted thing to do following an injury is peace and love. Pause to read.
So I love this video because the creator of the video does a really good job at showing what it's actually like to be in a psych room, in a psych ward. Now, you may be wondering, why are there special chairs and special door handles and special showers and even special faucets in a patient's room in the psych ward? And the answer is very simple. Everything in a patient's room in a psych ward is there strategically so that the patient doesn't end up hurting themselves with those objects. You see, a lot of times patients are put in the psych ward when they're having thoughts of unaliving themselves or even someone else. And we don't want to put them in a position where they have access to tools to hurt themselves. And that's why everything in these patients' rooms look a little bit different than what we have at home. And now you know.
Here's the truth about COVID-19 antiviral pills. They're only useful once you're already sick and not to be used as a preventive medication. They work by interrupting the virus's ability to replicate and spread throughout your body. COVID actually turns your body into its own personal copy machine, and these antivirals essentially cause it to run out of paper. They're only useful if you have a mild to moderate case of COVID to prevent it from becoming severe, and they must be taken within the first 5 days of illness. These meds are going to be very limited early on, and that's why we're reserving them for the highest risk patients, as they tend to have the worst outcomes. Also, if you're using a new pharmacy to fill these, make sure to let the pharmacist know what other medications you're taking in order to prevent drug interactions. And finally, if you're thinking about choosing between vaccines and antivirals, don't. Vaccines help prevent the fires, and antivirals help put the fires out. It's truly a COVID 1-2 combo.
When you hear the term Buddha, you probably imagine him to look something like this, or something like this. If they're both Buddha, why do they look so different? The word Buddha doesn't really refer to a single person. It essentially refers to a status. Those that manage to reach the state of enlightenment are called Buddha. This individual that you've probably seen depicted a lot is actually called Siddhartha Gautama. He was born within the region that is now considered Nepal around 2,500 years ago. It's through him that the philosophy and belief system of Buddhism really developed. But Buddhists don't believe that this individual was the first Buddha. They believe that there have been other Buddhas around the world since the beginning of humanity. And they believe that many others would reach the status of Buddha, which is why we have this individual, someone that's often referred to as Buddhai. Now, he actually lived in China around 1,000 years ago, and is considered to have reached enlightenment, hence the status.
The Playboy lifestyle of Rasputin, the Russian lovemaking machine. He was rumored to have a 13-inch magic stick the width of a wrist, and even made one lover pass out from an orgasm. Show me your ways. He bragged about not washing his underwear for a full 6 months, and often would find rot in his beard, yet still finesse his way into the Russian royal family. He embraced alcohol, orgies, and sin, because if you didn't sin, how could you repent? Never thought of it that way. Crowds of women gathered outside of his home just to get a glimpse of the man himself. And once he passed away, his penis was castrated and placed in a glass jar to be worshipped for the rest of eternity. Not only was he prolific in the sheets, he was nearly invincible. Assailants once poisoned his cake and wine, but it had no effect. He was then shot in the back, but escaped. They chased after him, this time landing a direct headshot before beating him down with a rubber stick. But my man had more lives than 50 Cent. As a young lad, his touch alone could heal horses. Let's get this man on an NFL training staff. And never forget he bodied his role in Anastasia.
I want all this shit. No. You can't have all this shit. Tough break, bitch. I'm taking this shit. Yo, Russia, stop these motherfuckers. No. That has nothing to do with us. We will allow this. Fuck y'all. I'll take your shit too. Hey! We had a deal! Fuck deals. I want all the shit. What the fuck is this? Yo, friends, step up. Nope. You saw what happened to us 20 years ago. We out. You can have the shit. Thank you, France. God. Oh my God. Italy, what do you have to say about this? To be honest, man, we kind of like what those motherfuckers is doing. We want all the shit too. What the fuck? Spain? Oh, they got some other stuff going on down there. Yo, America, come help us out. That ain't my problem, sir. Ha ha! Okay, now it's on!
When Einstein became famous, the success went to his head and he became rude and arrogant.
You could try merging Newton's equations with your own. Oh, yeah, good idea, yeah. I mean, or I could just vomit all over the blackboard, huh?
Einstein began foregoing his research for big nights out and reportedly spent only 20 minutes on the follow-up to his theory of relativity.
I have discovered that if you draw a zero and then put another zero on top, you'll get a number 8. Wow!
Einstein's reputation was plummeting, so to avoid being overtaken, he started giving funding to scientists he knew weren't a threat.
I am proud to award $200,000 to Ryan Hartley for his incredible discovery that you can eat coins and not be sick.
He also sabotaged promising young professors.
And I was wondering whether this affects the moon's gravity. No, the moon is not real. Really? No, it's just a funny shaped cloud. Is it? Oh, you have so much to learn.